My name is Amito, and this is the tale of how my existence transformed forever. I was raised in a small, serene village where my mother was the most compassionate person I knew. She had a unique gift of making everyone feel cherished, whether it was by preparing delicious donuts for our neighbors or by sitting by my bedside at night to share my favorite folktales. Everything began to shift when my mother received a new job opportunity. It was an exciting prospect for her, but it also meant she had to travel frequently. At first, we were all bursting with pride for her. Mom would leave early on Monday mornings and return on Fridays, always weary yet beaming, bringing back small tokens for my younger brother Daniel and me. She would tell us stories of new people she met and the important choices she was involved in. However, her absence created a void in our home. The laughter that filled our dining area began to fade, replaced by an uncomfortable silence or background noise of the television. Dad, who had always been our rock, seemed to withdraw into himself. He stopped telling little jokes that made Daniel laugh, and instead spent more time alone, gazing out the window and tinkering with things that didn't need fixing. I was 19 then, old enough to sense that something was amiss. Dad started to focus his attention on me in a way that felt unusual. Initially, I brushed it off. He would ask about my day, sit with me in the living room while I watched TV, or offer to help with my studies, even though I was already in university. But as the weeks passed, his behavior intensified. He began waiting for me after school, his eyes lighting up when I entered the house. He insisted on spending time together, suggesting outings for ice cream or offering to teach me how to drive. Meanwhile, he seemed to ignore Daniel completely, leaving him to play alone while Dad's gaze remained fixed on me. At first, I told myself he was just lonely without Mom. Perhaps he missed her as much as we did, and this was his way of coping. Yet inside, I felt a growing unease. There was a heaviness in the air whenever we were alone, an emotion I couldn't quite define. The warmth I once felt around Dad was slowly being replaced by something chilling, something that made me want to distance myself from him. One quiet night, the kind where the only sounds were crickets chirping outside and the gentle hum of the fan in the room, I was tucked under my blanket in my favorite nightgown, a light and breezy fabric perfect for warm evenings. Just as I began to drift off, I heard a knock at my door. The sound jolted me awake. No one ever knocked at this hour, especially not Dad. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it, but then the knock came again, louder this time. "Come in!" I hesitated, sitting up and adjusting my blanket for comfort. The door creaked open, and there he was, Dad, his expression serious and almost anxious. I was caught off guard. He rarely entered my room, especially at this hour. "Sorry for the disturbance, Amito," he said softly, his voice unusually gentle. "I need to talk to you about something." I nodded slowly, unsure of how to respond as he stepped inside and shut the door behind him. The soft click echoed in the silence, and I remained on the bed, my knees drawn up, sensing the tension in the air. "What's wrong?" I asked, striving to keep my voice steady. My heart raced not from fear but from the strangeness of the moment. He looked at me, his gaze searching my face as if he were looking for the right words. This hesitance was so unlike him. Dad was always confident, always knowing exactly what to say. I shifted uncomfortably, feeling exposed under his scrutiny. I told myself he was merely worried about something. Perhaps it was about Mom, Daniel, or work, but the unease in my chest wouldn't fade. "Is everything all right?" I asked again, this time with more urgency. For a moment, he remained silent, his hands clasped tightly together, his eyes averted. It seemed he was gathering his thoughts, deciding how to begin. "How are you feeling, Amito?" he asked softly, his voice low and hesitant. How is your body doing? The question took me by surprise. It was not the sort of inquiry he would typically make. I'm fine, Dad, I replied softly, unsure of where this conversation was heading. He nodded, his lips pressed together tightly before continuing. Your mother, she's not around, he said, trailing off. She's always away these days. I sensed he wasn't finished. Something in his tone made me uneasy, as if there was more he wanted to express but struggled to articulate. Then he looked at me, finally meeting my eyes, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. There was something in his expression that made my stomach twist uncomfortably. I was thinking, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. Since she's not here, maybe I could sleep here tonight. I blinked, trying to process what he had just said. Sleep here? I repeated, my voice filled with confusion. He nodded, and then his next word made my heart race. My body, he paused, as if choosing his words carefully, is in the mood for a touch. For a moment, I was speechless. The room felt as if it were closing in on me, the hair heavy with implications of his words. Dad, what are you talking about? I managed to stammer, my voice trembling. No, Dad, this isn't right. Please just leave. But he didn't leave. Instead, he remained seated, his tone softening, yet becoming more insistent. Amito, he began, almost pleading, you're the only one I can talk to. Your mother is never here. I feel so alone. You're my father, I whispered, hoping he'd grasp the gravity of what he was asking. Yet his persistence didn't waver. He tried to reassure me with comforting words, but they only deepened my unease. Every time I rejected him, he twisted the situation, cornering me. My heart pounded as the tension in the room thickened. After what felt like an eternity of his pressing, my resolve began to weaken. I was caught in a tempest of confusion, fear, and desperation. He wouldn't accept no for an answer, and before I fully realized what was happening, he crossed a boundary I had desperately tried to protect. Afterward, I sat frozen on the bed, my mind swirling with disbelief. Surely this was a one-time occurrence, I thought. It would never happen again. But I was mistaken. It continued, day after day, night after night. He found excuses and ways to make it happen repeatedly. I felt trapped, as if I were drowning, unable to signal for help. I knew I couldn't live like this any longer. The weight of the secret was suffocating, and I felt like I was gasping for air. That's when I decided to take action. I thought of Auntie Asha, our neighbor, someone kind, always willing to listen and offer support. If there was anyone I could trust, it was her. One evening, when Dad wasn't home, I slipped out and made my way to Auntie Asha's home. My hands trembled as I knocked on her door, my heart racing. When she opened it, her face lit up with a welcoming smile. Amito, my dear, come in. What brings you here at this hour? I hesitated at first, standing in the doorway, searching for the right words. But when I saw the concern in her eyes, I broke down, tears spilling down my cheeks. Auntie Asha, I managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper. I need help. She pulled me into her home, guiding me to the sofa. Tell me everything, child, she said gently, resting her hand on mine. I recounted every detail, every moment I had been too terrified to share before. As I spoke, I felt a mix of relief and fear, relief that someone finally knew. One night, while I was studying, I overheard Auntie Asha speaking to my mother. I don't want to upset you, Mercy, she whispered, but I've heard rumors. People are saying things about Amito and her dad. Are you sure everything is fine? Mom laughed nervously, brushing it off. Asha, don't believe everything you hear, she replied, but her eyes revealed her unease. As days turned into weeks, the whispers grew louder, echoing through our home, creating an atmosphere thick with tension that was impossible to ignore. One night, as I lay in bed, tossing and turning, I was abruptly awakened by raised voices from the living room. It was Mom and Dad, their tone sharp and filled with intensity. I held my breath, straining to catch every word. "How could you?" my mom cried, her voice thick with disbelief. "She's just a child. You've hurt her in ways I can't even explain." I could hear her sobs, a mix of heartbreak and fury. My heart raced as I listened, frozen in place by the weight of her words. Dad's response was disturbingly calm, as if he were detached from the chaos surrounding him. "You've been gone for months, Mercy," he said coldly. "Don't blame me for what happened. You were never here to see what was going on." I couldn't comprehend what was transpiring. The words, the pain in Mom's voice, it all felt like a nightmare, and I couldn't wake up from it. I didn't fully understand, but I knew something was gravely wrong. The following day, Mom packed her bags and left without saying a word. My best friend Priscilla was the first person I confided in. "Something's wrong at home," I said, tears streaming down my face. She embraced me tightly. "Amito, you have to tell someone. This isn't your fault." With her encouragement, I opened up to a teacher I trusted, Mrs. Nabwana. She listened patiently as I shared everything I had been too scared to say before. Without delay, Mrs. Nabwana took action. The morning after our conversation, she contacted Child Protection Services. She assured me that I had done the right thing by speaking up and promised that help was on the way. I was frightened and uncertain about what would happen next, but her calm demeanor provided some comfort. Within days, I was introduced to a counselor, arranged by authorities. Initially, I found it nearly impossible to voice my thoughts. The words felt stuck in my throat, too heavy to release, but the counselor was kind and patient, gently guiding me through my feelings. Each session became a little easier, and soon, I found myself sharing everything: the pain, the confusion, and the fear I had been carrying. With every word, I felt a weight lift off my chest, like I could finally breathe again after becoming trapped for far too long. Meanwhile, the authorities began their investigations. They questioned Dad, who denied everything, his voice calm and collected as if he had done nothing wrong. But the evidence against him was compelling. My testimony, the whispers from the neighbors, and the saved messages all contributed to the case. The day the police arrived at our house is one I will never forget. They came early in the morning, their uniforms crisp, their expressions serious. Mom stood by my side, gripping my hand tightly as they escorted Dad away in handcuffs. He didn't say much. He just looked at me with a coldness that sent a chill down my spine. Our home, once filled with laughter and warmth, felt like a battlefield that day, silent, tense, and filled with conflicting emotions. There was a relief in knowing that I was finally safe, that Dad could no longer harm me. Yet there was also sadness, a deep ache for the family we used to be, or at least the family I had believed we were. As the police car pulled away, tears streamed down my face, not because I missed him, but because I was mourning for the loss of an illusion, the facade of a perfect family. Mrs. Nawana wrapped her arm around my shoulder, and Mom hugged me tightly, whispering, "We'll get through this, my daughter, together." The trial was one of the most challenging and frightening experiences of my life. The room felt cold, the walls closing in as I prepared to share the truth. The thought of facing my father, the man I once trusted and revealed what he had done, was terrifying. I wanted to hide, to disappear, but I knew I had to be strong for myself, for my mom, and for those who believed in me. As I stepped into the witness box, my hands trembled, my heart raced, and my voice faltered at first. But I could hear Mom's steady encouragement from the back of the room, her voice soft yet warm. Priscilla, who had stood by my side throughout the ordeal, gave me an encouraging smile, squeezing my hand. They were my strength, my lifeline. I spoke slowly, carefully choosing my words. The room was silent, every eye on me. My gaze often drifted to my father across the room. His expression was cold, devoid of remorse, which made it harder to stay composed. But I reminded myself that this was the moment to stand up for myself. The judge listened intently, his eyes never leaving me as I shared my painful story. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the moment when the truth would be unveiled. The tension was palpable, and I could feel the weight of every gaze upon me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge delivered his verdict. The courtroom fell silent as he spoke the words that would forever alter the course of my life. The defendant is sentenced to 15 years in prison for his crimes. A rush of relief surged through me, and I felt my body weaken. I had done it. I had spoken the truth, and justice had been served. My father would finally face the consequences of his actions. I wanted to cry out, to scream in relief, but instead, I simply stood there, overwhelmed by the flood of emotions crashing over me. I was not alone anymore. Mom and Priscilla rushed to my side, their arms enveloping me. For the first time in what felt like ages, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could begin to heal. Life after the trial was not easy. Our family had to rebuild itself, piece by piece. Mom returned home, and together we began therapy. Daniel, my brother, who was too young to grasp the situation, sensed that something had changed. I found strength in sharing my story. I wanted others to know they weren't alone, and that help was available. Years later, I began working with an organization that supports children who have faced abuse. Telling my story was not just a path of healing for me, but also a way of helping others find their own healing. If you enjoyed this story and would like to hear more, please like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more thrilling content. Your support means a lot. Thank you for being part of this journey.